Christmas Eve, 2010, Longview, Texas. Maybe 4 in the morning, maybe 5. I've seen different times and different reports, so I honestly don't know exactly. Cold outside, probably cold by Texas standards anyway, which means maybe 45 degrees, maybe less. The Ruff family is asleep inside. There's a car in the driveway. When the family comes out that morning, they find her, 41 years old. Wife, mother, neighbor. The woman they knew as Lori Ruff, a pretty brunette who dressed like a matron, basically 20 years older than she looked. A vegetarian living in East Texas beef country, which already made her stick out. A grown woman who'd asked for an easy-bake oven for Christmas, and nobody could quite figure that out either. She's gone, just like that Christmas morning, and that's when the real story starts. Because Lori left something behind. Not just a husband, not just a little girl who was maybe 2 years old at the time. She left a question, maybe the strangest question a family has ever had to answer about someone they thought they knew. Who was this woman? Blake, her husband, he doesn't know. Her in-laws don't know. Her neighbors definitely don't know. The Social Security Administration doesn't know. The FBI doesn't know. For almost 6 years, nobody knows, because Lori Ruff spent her entire adult life making absolutely sure nobody would ever find out. She built a fake identity so airtight, so carefully constructed, that it took a retired federal investigator, a forensic genealogist who used to work with lasers, and the DNA of a toddler to finally crack it open. And what they found underneath was both simpler and sadder than anyone expected. Let's start from the beginning. Before we begin, you up? Good. Forget the noise outside for a second. Leave the cars, the sirens, and the stress at the door. Tonight, these stories will unfold slowly and respectfully, accompanied by gentle rain and subtle atmospheric visuals to create a calm space. Before we go any further, drop a comment and tell me what city you're in and what time it is there. And hit subscribe so we can stick together in the dark. We tell these dark stories not for entertainment or spectacle, and without any dramatization. We share them as a poignant reminder of the real people and real lives that were lost, and perhaps to help us recognize the warning signs that could prevent similar tragedies. For the best experience, lower your volume just a bit, enough to let the rain gently carry you off to sleep. Lights off? Okay, good. Take a breath, a real one. Let's go back. Way back. So let's start with Blake Ruff, because Blake is maybe the most important person in this story, after Lori herself, and understanding him helps explain how this worked for as long as it did. Blake was from Longview, Texas. His family was what East Texans call established, banking, real estate, country club memberships. The kind of family where everyone knows the name, and the name means something. Close-knit, warm, the sort of people who put wedding announcements in the local paper and expect their kids to show up for Sunday lunch and actually know each other's business. Blake's identical twin brother David had joined a Bible study class at Northwest Bible Church in Dallas, and Blake, being the kind of man who followed where his brother went, joined too. In 2003, he met Lori Kennedy. She was pretty, brunette, smart, fond of animals, liked going out for tea. She didn't say much about herself. Blake didn't push. His brother-in-law would later describe him with a kind of affectionate exasperation. He does not have much of an inner monologue. Blake took people at face value. He asked no follow-up questions. When Lori told him her parents were dead and she'd had a rough childhood and she'd burned all her old photographs because of how bad things had been, Blake said okay and moved on. He was in love with her. That was enough for him. The Ruff family was not so easily satisfied. Blake's mother, Nancy, invited the couple to lunch to get to know Lori, the way you do when your son is serious about someone. She asked about Lori's family, her youth, her story. "Tell us about yourself," Nancy said, trying to be friendly, trying to build something. Her parents were dead, Lori said. No siblings. No aunts or uncles. No one. High school. Lori skipped straight to college. Her father had been a failed stockbroker. She was from Arizona. It went on like that all afternoon, Nancy asking, Lori deflecting, the conversation circling the same empty space where a past should have been. The Ruffs weren't sure about her, but Blake was sure about her, and that was that. When the couple decided to marry, Nancy wanted to place an announcement in the local paper. Standard practice for a family like the Ruffs, a social gesture, a way of sharing good news with the community they'd been part of for generations. She started drafting it. Blake Ruff, son of John and Nancy Ruff, and Lori Kennedy. Lori said no. No announcement. No photos. We don't do things like that. After the wedding, Lori and Blake moved to Leonard, Texas. Population 1,900. About 125 miles from the Ruff family in Longview, which is probably not a coincidence. They bought a house on 2 acres outside town, down a single-lane road where the neighbors were spread out and life was quiet and nobody dropped by unannounced. She worked from home, called herself a marketing consultant, mostly did mystery shopping, testing products, eating at restaurants and filing reports, the kind of work you can do entirely alone and entirely on your own schedule without ever having to explain yourself to anyone. She wanted a baby. That much was clear, maybe the clearest thing about her. She and Blake tried for years, suffered multiple miscarriages, went through IVF. In the summer of 2008, their daughter was born. After the baby arrived, Lori became, in the words of the people around her, extremely protective. She didn't want anyone else holding the child. Not Blake's mother, not his sisters, not relatives who came to visit and expected the normal access that families expect with a new baby. She kept the girl close in a way that went past maternal instinct into something else, something that made the Ruff family increasingly uncomfortable and that Blake, to his credit, eventually could no longer rationalize. The marriage deteriorated. There were arguments, therapy sessions that went nowhere, a growing sense on the Ruff family's part that something was genuinely wrong, not just difficult, wrong. By the summer of 2010, Blake moved back to his parents' house in Longview, filed for divorce, left Lori and Leonard with their daughter. And that's when things got bad. Neighbors reported that Lori and the little girl were looking thin. Undernourished, one recalled the specific word they used. Lori was seen outside the house, pacing back and forth, talking to herself in ways that didn't quite cohere. She sent harassing emails to the Ruff family, threatening ones. She showed up at a custody exchange and created a scene, the details of which nobody has fully described publicly, but which apparently required intervention. She stole a set of house keys from the Ruffs. The harassment escalated to the point where the family filed a formal cease and desist order against her just days before Christmas 2010. On the morning of December 24th, Blake's father, John, stepped outside to get the newspaper and found a car in the driveway with the engine running. Inside were 2 notes and a woman who had spent her entire adult life being someone she wasn't and who had finally, apparently, run out of road. The notes were later described by investigators as the incoherent ramblings of a clearly disturbed person. One was 11 pages long, addressed to Blake. The other was sealed, addressed to their daughter, to be opened on her 18th birthday. Neither said who Lori Ruff actually was. Nobody knew. Not the investigators who came to the scene, not the Ruff family who had known her for 7 years, not the Social Security Administration investigator who would spend the next 2 years of his life trying to find out. Nobody knew except Lori, and Lori was gone. So here's the thing nobody in the Ruff family understood yet. The box wasn't just evidence of a lie. It was a 22-year construction project. Somebody had spent 2 decades building a fake human being from scratch, and they'd done it so well that even after death, even after the box was open and the papers were spread across a table, nobody could figure out who'd actually built it. Joe Velling had seen identity theft before. Hundreds of cases, maybe thousands over his career with the Social Security Administration. Con men, fraudsters, people running from debt or child support or criminal records. He'd seen elaborate schemes, patient schemes, schemes that fooled banks and government offices for years. He'd never seen anything like this. The Becky Sue Turner connection was straightforward enough. A 2-year-old girl who died in a Pierce County house fire in 1971. Her birth certificate sitting in a records office going nowhere. Basically just a name attached to nobody living. Identity thieves used dead children's birth certificates. Velling knew this. Standard method. But everything before 1988 was a wall. No Lori Kennedy before July 5, 1988. No Becky Sue Turner, who survived the fire. And behind both of those names, nothing. No fingerprint matches. No facial recognition hits. No missing persons reports that fit. Velling pulled every database he had access to. Followed every thread. Did everything a federal investigator with government clearance can do. Nothing. Think about how strange that is. You genuinely cannot disappear in America. There's always something left behind. A hospital record, a school enrollment, a speeding ticket, a cousin who mentioned your name once in an insurance claim. The digital age made it worse. But even before that, before the internet, people left traces everywhere just by existing. Lori had left none. Velling started wondering if she'd had help. A professional. Someone in the business of making people disappear. An identity broker. Basically, a person who for the right amount of money could set you up with a clean new life. And guarantee nothing connected back, because this level of erasure, this completeness, didn't feel accidental. It felt engineered. Then there were the notes. 3 pieces of paper found in the box with Lori's handwriting. North Hollywood Police. 402 months. Ben Perkins. Velling contacted Ben Perkins. He's a Los Angeles attorney, marketed his services specifically to the black community in L.A., never in his career taken on a white client. He'd never heard of Becky Sue Turner. never heard of Lori Kennedy, had genuinely no idea why his name was written in a dead woman's secret box in Texas. Dead end. 402 months is 33 and a half years. Prison time, maybe. That's the theory most people landed on, that Lori was running from a sentence, or terrified of earning one, or had done something that could have put her away for 3 decades. But there's no record, no charges, no arrests, nothing in any database that matches. North Hollywood Police. I genuinely don't know what that means. Neither does anyone else who studied this case. Maybe Lori knew. Maybe it was a reminder to herself, something specific and terrifying that only made sense inside her own head. But she took the meaning with her, and now it's just 3 words on a piece of paper that mean nothing to anyone. By 2013, Velling is stuck. 2 years of work. No name, no family, no origin point. So he goes public. June 22nd, 2013. The Seattle Times runs a feature about the case, Joe Velling's case. Lori Ruff's story, the box, the stolen identity, all of it. The article gets picked up by newspapers around the world, dozens of countries, maybe hundreds of outlets, translated into languages Velling never expected. And the internet loses its mind. The Webb sleuth community, if you don't know this world, is basically thousands of amateur investigators who spend their evenings and weekends trying to solve cold cases. Forums, Reddit threads, Facebook groups full of retired teachers and stay-at-home parents and insomniacs who are genuinely, methodically good at digging through public records. They'd solved things before. Identified Jane Doe's, found missing persons, cracked cases that professional investigators had given up on. They'd poured into Lori Ruff like nothing Velling had ever seen. The theories were everywhere. Maybe she escaped a polygamous cult. There was something about the way she dressed, modest and old-fashioned, that made people think isolated religious community. Maybe she'd witnessed something terrible and was hiding from whoever was responsible. Maybe she herself had done something, I don't know what, something bad enough to run from for over 2 decades. Maybe the notes were a code. Maybe there were 2 Ben Perkins and they had the wrong one. Maybe 402 months wasn't prison time at all, but a date, an address, a phone number written in some system nobody recognized. For 3 years the theories pile up. Nothing lands. And then a nuclear physicist gets involved. Colleen Fitzpatrick spent 25 years working with lasers. Literally optics research, precision measurement, shining beams of light at things to understand their properties. In the early 2000s, she pivoted into forensic genealogy, using DNA databases to solve identity mysteries. She was good at it in the way that people who spent decades in hard science are good at things methodically, patiently, without ego about the outcome. She heard about Lori Ruff in 2013, and she saw something others had missed. The Ruff family had already sent DNA samples to 23andMe and Ancestry.com, Blake's saliva, and their daughters. Standard approach. But Fitzpatrick realized you could do something more sophisticated with that data. A technique called genetic genealogy phasing. You take the daughter's full genetic profile and subtract Blake's known contribution, and what's left is essentially Lori's DNA, reconstructed from her child. From there you match it against public ancestry databases, find distant cousins, follow branches of a family tree that has no name yet until a name finally emerges. It takes about a year of careful work, branch by branch, match by match, dead ends and redirections and starting over. But slowly, something takes shape. The DNA points east, Pennsylvania. A family name starts appearing across multiple matches, across different branches of the tree, too consistently to be coincidence. Cassidy. Fitzpatrick calls Velling, tells him she thinks she knows where Lori came from. He's skeptical. He's been down dead ends before, good-looking leads that dissolved into nothing the moment you applied pressure. But the genetic evidence is specific enough that he books a flight to Philadelphia. No badge, he's retired. He has photographs of a dead woman and a theory built on someone else's DNA analysis and the knowledge that whatever he's about to say to a stranger is going to change their life in a way that can't be undone. He finds the address. He knocks on the door. He lays the photographs of Lori Ruff on the table, one by one. The family member looks down, doesn't say anything for a moment. Then, my God, that's Kimberly. Kimberly McLean, that's the answer. 22 years, 3 stolen identities, 1 marriage, 1 daughter, and it comes down to a name that nobody had thought to look for because nobody knew it existed. Velling lays the photographs on the table. He's sitting across from a member of the Cassidy family in Philadelphia, with no badge and no authority, and basically nothing but photos of a dead woman and a theory built on someone else's DNA work. And the family member looks down at those photos and says something that closes a 6-year mystery in about 4 seconds. My God, that's Kimberly. And then the gaps fill in. Kimberly Maria McLean, born October 16, 1968, King of Prussia, Pennsylvania. Her parents divorced when she was maybe in her early teens, probably a rough split, basically the kind of family fracture that changes everything about how a kid sees the world. Her mother remarried or got involved with someone new. I've seen slightly different versions of this, and Kimberly and her mother weren't getting along, maybe hadn't been getting along for years. Probably a relationship that was already broken before the divorce made everything worse. And then there was a move, new neighborhood, new school. At 17, 18 years old. I don't know if people fully appreciate how catastrophic that can feel at that age. Basically being uprooted from everything you know, right, when you're trying to figure out who you are. Kimberly apparently told her mother she was leaving. Maybe during a fight, probably not a dramatic speech, just I'm going. And she went. She was 18 years old, and nobody in her family would see her again for 30 years. No calls, no postcards, not a single birthday card, not a rumor filtering back through relatives, nothing. Just complete silence for 3 decades. And here's what I keep coming back to. I don't know how to overstate this. The running away part is understandable. Teenagers run away. That happens. The staying gone part is something else entirely. That requires discipline. That requires waking up every Christmas morning for 22 years and choosing silence over and over again. Whatever Kimberly was running from, she was more afraid of it than she was of the loneliness. Her mother reported her missing, searched for her, probably for years, probably never really stopped in the way that mothers never really stop. But she was looking for Kimberly McLean, and Kimberly McLean didn't exist anymore. By 1988, she was Becky Sue Turner on paper and Lori Kennedy in court. And by 2004, she was Lori Ruff in a church in Texas marrying a man who had no idea who she actually was. Her mother had to wait for her daughter to die before she could find out what happened to her. I've sat with that for a while, and I still don't know what to do with it. So what was she running from? Here's the honest answer. We don't fully know. Maybe we never will. Probably the real reason died in that driveway on Christmas morning 2010. The family reunion gave us a name and an origin and a few details about a difficult home situation. It didn't give us the thing. The actual reason, because people don't steal dead children's identities and rebuild themselves from nothing because of a rough divorce and a new school. I mean, that's not enough. That doesn't explain the level of commitment involved, the years of maintenance and silence and careful construction. Something else happened, or something else was happening. I don't know what it was. The notes in the lockbox still don't make sense, North Hollywood Police. 402 months. Ben Perkins, nobody has explained those satisfactorily. Probably nobody ever will. Maybe they were reminders to herself, some private accounting of a fear so specific it only made sense inside her own head. Maybe she was afraid of someone. Maybe she'd done something. Maybe something had been done to her. She took the meaning with her. What we do know is that for 22 years, basically from 1988 until 2010, Lori Ruff held it together, got a degree, built a career, fell in love, or something that looked like love, at a Bible study class in Dallas with a steady, kind man who respected her enough not to push. Had a daughter in 2008, built something that from the outside looked like an ordinary life in small-town Texas. And then something started breaking down. The marriage fell apart. Blake has never said much publicly about the specifics, just that the secrecy became too much, the distance too great, the walls too high to keep scaling year after year. By 2010, they were divorced. Lori was alone with a 2-year-old daughter, and whatever she'd been holding together for 2 decades was maybe finally becoming too heavy to carry. Christmas Eve, 2010. She drove to the Ruff family home in Longview, parked in the driveway. The family found her the next morning. And her daughter, I think about her a lot. I don't know her name, probably grown now, maybe in her mid-teens when the identity was finally confirmed in 2016. What does that feel like, finding out your mother was someone else entirely? That the empty spaces she carried weren't random damage, but a whole hidden life, a whole hidden person, buried so deep that it took DNA science and a retired federal agent and a nuclear physicist to find her. Some questions got answered in 2016. The name, the origin, the basic shape of the disappearance. Most didn't. The real story, the one that started somewhere between 1986 and 1988, and whatever happened during those 2 years that turned an 18-year-old runaway from Pennsylvania into someone methodical enough to construct an entirely new human being, that story is gone. It went with Lori into a driveway on a Texas Christmas morning, and it isn't coming back. If you're still with me, still in the dark, still thinking about Kimberly and that lockbox and a little girl who grew up not knowing her mother's real name, drop a lock in the comments. I want to know who made it this far tonight. And if this story left you with that particular feeling, the one where the mystery gets solved but somehow feels more unsettling than before, stay with me. Because next, we're going back to 1976, a small Texas town. A family of 4 that walked out of their lives one afternoon and simply ceased to exist. No struggle, no goodbye. The neighbors noticed the mail piling up. The car was still in the driveway. The food was still on the table. 4 people. Gone. That one's next. Second ice starting. December 1948. Maybe 3 years after the end of the war. Probably still that strange, unsettled period where everyone was trying to figure out what normal looked like again. Basically, a world that had been through something so enormous that the aftershocks were still moving through everything. Governments, families, individual people walking around carrying things nobody talked about. Adelaide was a quiet city, respectable, conservative, the kind of place where people knew their neighbors and strange things didn't happen. Or if they did, nobody said so out loud. Somerton Beach was a popular spot, maybe a mile or 2 south of the city center, probably full of families on weekends. The kind of beach where a man in a suit sitting against the seawall on a warm November evening would have been noticed by people walking past. And he was noticed. That's one of the strangest details of this whole case. The night before his tragic condition was discovered November 30th, so the evening before multiple people saw him there. A couple walking along the beach remembered a man in that exact spot. Same position, legs out, ankles crossed, arm raised like he was trying to wave at something or reach for something, maybe trying to reach for a personal item, probably just the last muscular movement of a man fading or already gone. They thought he was unresponsive. A jeweler and his wife saw him too. Same spot, same position. Probably around 7 or 7:30 in the evening. Still thought he was in a clouded state. Nobody stopped. Nobody checked on him. He sat there against that seawall for maybe 8 or 9 hours, fading or already gone, while people walked past and made assumptions and kept going. I don't know what to do with that. Maybe nothing. Probably it doesn't mean anything except that people see what they expect to see. Basically, that a man sitting on a beach at night reads as being in a clouded state until you have a reason to think otherwise. The investigation gets strange fast. The labels, every single one cut out, suggest premeditation. Someone, either the man himself or someone else, went through every garment before he ended up on that beach and removed everything that could identify where he'd been, what he'd bought, where he was from. His shirt, his trousers, his jacket, his singlet, his tie, all of it. I don't know how long that takes, probably an hour, at least if you're thorough. Basically a deliberate and patient act of erasure. His shoes were an American style, but possibly British made. His comb was aluminum, American manufactured. His chewing gum was juicy fruit, also American. But his personal items were English, his matches Australian. Investigators tried to piece together a nationality from this collection of objects and got nowhere. Maybe because the objects were deliberately mixed, probably because this man had lived or traveled across multiple countries. Basically a puzzle designed to have no solution. The pocket items were interesting. He had a pack of Kensitas, but the contents inside were actually a different brand transferred the items from one pack to another, maybe to appear to use a more expensive brand. Probably just one of those small human habits that means nothing or means everything depending on what you're looking for. A suitcase turned up at Adelaide railway station. traced to the man through its contents, maybe matched to him through clothing and other items inside, probably checked into left luggage sometime before his final moments. Inside, a dressing gown, slippers, a red checked shirt, some tools, a stenciling brush, thread, a screwdriver, and more clothing with labels removed. One item had the name T. Keene stenciled on it. Another said Keene, and a laundry bag said Keene too. Police searched every record they had for a missing man named Keene. Found nothing that fit. The name might have been his, or might have belonged to someone whose clothes he'd acquired, or might have been deliberately placed to mislead, I don't know. Maybe all three theories were seriously considered at different points, probably none of them ever resolved. The cause of final moments stayed open. The pathologist, a man named John Cleland, concluded that the most likely cause was an external compound, maybe a digitalis-based compound or something similar, probably something that would leave the individual in good condition and be difficult to detect with 1948 forensic techniques. The stomach contents showed a meal eaten some hours before passed away, lumps of potato partly digested, basically a man who'd eaten dinner somewhere and then sat down on a beach and passed away. But here's the thing about the chemical interference theory: there was no untraceable substance found, not a trace. Either the compound used was undetectable with the tools available at the time, or it was something that metabolized completely before the official procedure, or the pathologist was wrong and something else caused his fate. 70 years of examining this case, and nobody has definitively answered that question. And then, months after the individual was found and laid to rest, Adelaide was the first place in South Australia to embalm an unidentified individual, before final arrangements, basically anticipating they might need to re-examine it later, which turned out to be important. A detective went back through the evidence one more time and found the scrap of paper in the fob pocket. Taman Shud, it is finished. The phrase comes from the Rubaiyat of Omar Khayyam, a collection of Persian quatrains from the 12th century, poems about fate and mortality and the pleasures of a life that ends too soon. The final page of the book ends with those two words: "It is finished, done, complete." But the scrap had been torn from a real physical copy of the book, which meant somewhere in Adelaide there was a specific copy of the Rubaiyat of Omar Khayyam with its final page missing. Police put out a public appeal, asked if anyone had found or owned such a book. Someone had. A man came forward, didn't want his name used, probably didn't want to be involved, maybe was nervous about what police would find, and said he'd found a copy of the Rubaiyat in the back seat of his unlocked car sometime in November. 1948, maybe tossed there by someone passing, probably just abandoned. He'd kept it because he didn't know what else to do with it. Police examined the book. On the back cover, faint pencil markings, 5 lines of letters, maybe a code, probably something deliberately obscured. Basically the kind of writing you'd make in a hurry and press very lightly so it could be erased. But it hadn't been erased, and under ultraviolet light the letters were clear. And below the code a phone number, an unlisted phone number, the kind you have specifically so strangers can't find you. So the phone number leads somewhere. Police trace it to a woman living in Glenelg, a suburb of Adelaide. maybe a mile from Somerton Beach, probably close enough to walk on a warm evening. Her name, at least the name investigators use in public records for decades to protect her identity, is Justin. Her real name is Jessica Thompson, née Harkness, a nurse living with her husband and young son in a quiet residential street, basically. A 15-minute walk from where the Somerton Man spent his final moments. The number is unlisted, which means he had it written down deliberately, probably given to him by Jessica herself at some point, maybe copied from somewhere she hadn't expected anyone to find. Detective Sergeant Lionel Lean goes to see her, shows her a cast of the unidentified man's face, a forensic mask, basically a plaster replica made from the subject. And here's what the detective's report says about her reaction. She is, and I'm quoting from the official record, completely taken aback to the point of giving the appearance she was about to faint. She doesn't faint, she recovers, and she says she doesn't know him. Doesn't know why her phone number would be in a book found near his location. Doesn't know who he is. Has no information that could help the investigation. She's calm by the end of the interview, maybe too calm, probably practiced at keeping things inside. Basically a woman who has decided what she's going to say and is going to say it. Lean doesn't push hard enough. Maybe he's being polite, probably operating under social norms of the time that made it difficult to really press a woman on something this personal, basically the 1940s version of not wanting to make a scene. He lets her go. The trail goes cold. Jessica Thompson will never publicly discuss what she knew about the Somerton Man. Not in 1948, not ever. She passes away in 2007, still carrying whatever she carried, basically taking it with her the same way he apparently intended to take everything with him. But here's what investigators notice later, much later. Jessica has a son. His name is Robin, born in 1947, so roughly a year before the Somerton Man passes away on the beach near her house. And Robin has unusual physical characteristics, a specific dental formation, and a very rare ear shape, something called hypodontia combined with a particular configuration of the pinna that geneticists later describe as occurring in maybe 1 in 10,000 people, probably rarer than that. The Somerton Man has the same ear shape, the same dental configuration. Photographs from the medical examination, compared decades later to photographs of Robin, show the match clearly enough that multiple researchers independently reach the same conclusion. Robin is probably the Somerton Man's son, which means Jessica knew him, which means she lied. But we're getting ahead of ourselves, because while all of this is developing slowly over years, there's still the matter of the code. The back cover of the Rubaiyat, under ultraviolet light, shows 5 lines of capital letters. 70-plus years of cryptographers, intelligence agencies, amateur code breakers, computer scientists, university professors, and internet obsessors have looked at these letters and nobody has definitively cracked them. Naval intelligence examined it in 1949 and got nowhere. Wartime code breakers looked at it. The NSA probably looked at it at some point. I don't know that for certain. Maybe just assuming, based on how much attention this case got. Nothing. The second and fourth lines are underlined in the original. The first line is crossed out, maybe a false start, probably a mistake that got corrected. Some researchers think it's a one-time pad cipher, basically unbreakable without the corresponding key. Others think it's a mnemonic, maybe the first letters of words in a sentence or a poem. Others think it's shorthand. Others think it's meaningless, deliberately written to look like a code, so investigators would spend decades chasing nothing. One theory that emerged recently, and I find this may be the most human explanation of all of them, probably the one that fits the rest of the story best, is that the letters correspond to railway stations in Adelaide. Someone mapped the letters against the train network and found that they trace a route, basically a systematic search of the coastal suburbs back and forth between the same 2 or 3 stations, the kind of pattern you'd make if you were looking for someone, looking for a specific person, checking the same places over and over because you couldn't find them. The last station in the sequence sits about 1.5 miles from Somerton Beach. So maybe the code isn't a spy cipher. Maybe it's a man's record of trying to find a woman who didn't want to be found, written in the back of a book he was carrying because it meant something to both of them. And the last entry in the sequence is the place where he finally stopped looking. And there's one more thing about the book. Inside the front cover, in light pencil, someone had written a name. Justin, Jessica Thompson's nickname. Basically the name people who knew her well used, probably not something a stranger would know. And below it, a phone number, her unlisted number, the same one police traced. The book was given to her, or given back to her, or left somewhere she was supposed to find it, I don't know which. Maybe all 3 theories have been seriously argued. But the connection between the unidentified man and Jessica Thompson runs through this book, like a thread, basically the one piece of physical evidence that ties everything together, and Jessica spent the rest of her life pretending it didn't exist. Her daughter Kate, interviewed decades later, said something that stopped researchers cold. She said her mother had told her that she knew who the Somerton Man was, that she had known him, that the knowledge of his identity was something she'd carried and protected and refused to share. Why? Kate didn't know, or said she didn't know. Maybe she was protecting her mother, even after her mother was gone, probably honoring some agreement that had outlasted the people who made it. Jessica had learned Russian at some point in her life and never told her children when or why. A period of global tension was starting. The world was full of people who needed to disappear for reasons that couldn't be explained in a police interview in a living room in suburban Adelaide. Or maybe it was simpler than all of that. Maybe she loved him. Maybe he came looking for her and she couldn't see him, and he sat down on a beach 1 mile from her house and reached the end of his journey. Taman Shud. So here's where the case sits for 70 years, maybe the longest any major identity mystery stays completely open in modern forensic history. Probably the one cold case that every generation of investigators and professors and amateur internet detectives picks up and puts back down again with nothing to show for it. I mean genuinely nothing. Not a name, not an official conclusion, not an explanation for the code or the labels or the phone number or any of it. An unidentified man on a beach. That's all they have for 7 decades. And then in 2021, someone initiates a formal recovery. The South Australian government approves the physical re-examination after years of requests from Derek Abbott, a professor of electrical engineering at the University of Adelaide, who'd been obsessed with this case for maybe a decade, probably longer, basically the kind of obsession that starts as a research interest and becomes something you can't put down. I mean the kind where you're still running calculations at 2 a.m., and you've mapped the cipher against every possible system, and you've interviewed the late woman's descendants, and you still can't let it go. He needed DNA. He needed the subject. They initiate the recovery of the Somerton Man in May 2021. Maybe a strange morning, probably surreal for everyone standing around that resting place, basically reopening something that's been closed for 73 years, hoping there's enough biological material left to tell them anything. The preservation process helped. Adelaide police had preserved the subject before final arrangements, specifically because they anticipated needing to reopen this case someday. I don't know if they imagined it would take 7 decades, but they planned for it anyway. Basically one of the most prescient decisions in Australian forensic history, the embalming preserved hair. Hair contains DNA. Abbott works with Colleen Fitzpatrick, the same forensic genealogist who cracked the Lori Ruff case. I mean literally the same woman, probably becoming the most important figure in cold case. DNA identification alive, and they extract genetic material from hairs caught in the plaster of the forensic mask. Maybe tiny fragments, probably barely enough, basically working with whatever the embalming had preserved through 7 decades of being laid to rest. They run it through ancestry databases, follow matches, build out a family tree, branch by branch, until something takes shape. July 26, 2022. The Somerton Man is Carl Webb, Charles Carl Webb, born 1905 in Melbourne, an electrical engineer and instrument maker, 43 years old when he sat down on that beach and didn't get up. He had a wife separated, probably badly. I mean the divorce records show the kind of contested, painful split that leaves damage on everyone involved, maybe years of it. He had a history of depression. I don't know the specifics of what that looked like for him. Probably not that different from what it looks like for anyone. Basically a man who struggled with something heavy for a long time. And he had, according to what emerged after the identification, a previous severe personal crisis. He vanished from public records in April 1947, 18 months before he turned up on Somerton Beach. Think about that for a second. 18 months. Nobody knows where Carl Webb was or what he was doing during that entire period. I mean, not a trace. Basically, a man who dropped out of the recordable world completely and reappeared as an unidentified figure on a beach. Maybe living under a different name, probably moving around, possibly spending weeks in Adelaide searching for Jessica Thompson. I don't know, maybe all 3 at different points. The railway theory would place him here for weeks before his passing, back and forth across the same coastal stations, the kind of obsessive systematic rechecking that his divorce records suggest was characteristic of him. Basically a man who couldn't stop looking for something even after it was clear he wasn't going to find it. He also liked betting on horses, apparently. Public records mention this after the identification. I don't know how prominently, but it surfaces and gives a second possible explanation for the code. Maybe it's not railway stations at all. Maybe it's the first letters of horses' names, a betting record or a system that only made sense inside Carl Webb's head and went with him when he passed away. The crossed-out first line could be a scratched entry, maybe a race he changed his mind about, Probably something that meant everything to him and nothing to everyone who came after. I don't know. Nobody knows. Maybe nobody ever will. His nephew John Keene lived in the United States, which explains the American comb and the juicy fruit gum. I mean hand-me-downs from a relative abroad, probably carried around for years because someone gave them to you, not because they say anything about where you're from. The labels cut from every garment still don't have a complete explanation. Maybe Carl did it himself, probably to ensure that if things went the way he'd planned them to go, even his final traces would be impossible to identify. He almost succeeded. I mean, genuinely almost 74 years almost. And then there's Jessica. Her daughter, Kate, confirmed after her mother's passing that Jessica had told her she knew who the Somerton Man was. Knew him, chose not to say, carried that knowledge for 60 years, and took it with her in 2007, basically the same move he'd made on the beach, deciding what gets concealed and making sure it stays there. She'd written his nickname in the front of the book. She'd given him her unlisted number. She'd almost fainted when she saw his forensic mask, and then composed herself and said she didn't recognize him. I mean, sat across from a detective and lied with complete conviction. Probably not the first time she'd done it. Basically, a woman who had made a decision and was going to live inside that decision for the rest of her life. Her son Robin, born in 1947, during those blank 18 months in Carl Webb's timeline, had the same rare ear configuration, the same unusual dental pattern. Robin passed away in 2009, maybe never knowing who his father was, probably carrying his own unanswerable question. Jessica passed away in 2007. Whatever happened between her and Carl, whether it was an affair that ended badly, whether he came to Adelaide hoping for something she couldn't give him, whether she met him one last time or simply couldn't be found, gone. Gone with two people who decided to keep it private and kept it so private that it took DNA science and 3/4 of a century to find even the shape of it. Carl Webb sat down on Somerton Beach on a warm November evening in 1948. He had train and bus tickets he'd never use. A personal item he didn't finish. 2 words sewn into a hidden pocket, torn from the last page of a book of poems about fate and lost time. He'd cut every label from his clothes, removed every trace of his name from everything he owned, left a code that may never be fully solved, carried a phone number for a woman a mile away who wasn't coming. And then he let the night take its course, probably watching the ocean, maybe thinking about her, and by morning the discarded item had fallen from his lips and 2 men on horseback rode past, thinking he was unresponsive. Carl Webb, electrical engineer, Melbourne, 43 years old. We know his name now. We don't know much else. Sleep well.